Is this some kind of a joke, Captain?
If it is jokes you desire, I could summon the court jester. Summon the court jester! Hold the jester!
Hi, Lewis. I hope I'm saying your name correctly. Congratulations on winning the August 11th Second Club contest. And I think you did a really nice job with your animation for this. And I look forward to giving you some feedback. My name is Dana Bodway, and I have been a mentor for Animation Mentor for 16 and a half years. I've been an animator for 23 and a half years. And I've been all over the place. I've worked on everything from games, cinematics, to commercials, to television series, feature films, DVD films. I've even worked on some stuff for a fine artist that has gone around to galleries all over the world, which was an unintended life goal of mine, to walk into a gallery in Manhattan and see my work there. That was a very strange, unintended goal. But you just never know. This is one of the great things about having this kind of a career is there's so many different things that you can work on, and the possibilities are really kind of endless. And so, I say have at it and have fun. So let's have a look at your shot, your scene. First, I'll just play it through a couple of times, and then I will get into some notes on it.
Is this some kind of a joke, Captain?
If it is jokes you desire, I could summon the court jester. Summon the court jester! Hold the jester!
Is this some kind of a joke, Captain?
If it is jokes you desire, I could summon the court jester. Summon the court jester! Hold the jester!
I think the line of dialogue was actually really fun to work with, and it looks like you really were able to sort of capture the energy of it, and the difference in the two characters, the sort of playfulness of the captain and the uber seriousness of the big guy, and that sort of interaction and the sudden change of circumstance when the big guy pulls the sword on the captain. So that's all really fun. The poses are nice and clear. You've got nice, clear silhouettes. I think the animation style is really interesting as well. There's definitely a flavor to it. And so when the characters become still, they're very still. And I think as long as you have a consistent feel in your work, so, you don't want to have some parts feel like they are sort of have constant keep alives and moving holds that have more movement and then some that don't. So I like the fact that, you've got sort of a consistent feel to the way your characters are moving. They live in that world where the style is that the pauses have more stillness to them. And I think, as long, everything doesn't need to look like a particular style of animation. It doesn't need to look like a Pixar movie where everything is extremely sort of pliable and fleshy, and there's this I don't want to say constant movement, because then it sounds like things are sort of floating around too much. That's not what I mean. But I mean, there's always like a breathing in everything sort of all the time. But there are plenty of different animation styles, and you can invent your own. You can invent the movement style that is something that expresses you. So if you look at the short film Presto, for instance, that Pixar did many moons ago, the magician character has, the angrier he gets, the more rigid his movements become, and the more still his holds become. So it's kind of it feels like a bit of a Tex Avery thing, and it can work really, really well. And you've done a good job with utilizing the movement style of your characters here. I like the way that your characters' eye darts are showing their thought processes. So, like here, as your character is looking at the map, there is a quick little eye dart that shows up there. That shows the character really, pondering the map. And it's a tiny little move, but it creates this tiny little staccato rhythm that is a nice way to break up the phrasing in the shot, and also shows the character being in his head and having thoughts, and he's asking the captain a question about what he's seeing on the map, right? So for him to be glancing, at a couple of different things on it while he's asking the question makes so much sense, and it really gives him a clear mental focus and a clear objective for the acting.
Kind of a joke, Captain.
If it is
kind of a joke, Captain. Is this some kind of a joke, Captain?
And I love the expression on his face when he looks over at the captain to kind of ask the question, is this some kind of a joke, Captain? It's a very stern expression. His teeth are gritted together, so he's finishing up the dialogue, but he's also got this expression that goes along with it. And it works really well.
I'm kind of a joke, Captain.
If it is jokes you desire, I could summon the court jester.
And the captain is kind of he feels like kind of a loosey-goosey guy. He's got this sense of lightheartedness about him that is obviously not part of the other guy's personality. And, he's like, yeah, go get the court jester, and his poses really reflect that well. And he looks like he's kind of got this this sort of, so if you want to, I could do this. So he's kind of got this lighthearted thing going on. And I love how his gestures and his poses really reflect that.
I could summon the court jester.
And the intensity when he calls for the court jester as well is really fun. And you have a nice contrast between poses here and here. So it gives it a lot of energy. And I also really like the gestures the arcs in the hand gestures. So, you can see that one arm comes down and the other one comes up. And there's this flow between what's happening visually between the one arm and the other arm. And also working with the weight shift. That's really, really nice. And the arcs in this guy's too, just with the way he's holding the map and when he does the weight shift, and there's a little arc in the arm movement in that as well. It's subtle, but it's really nice. And flows well with the movement of everything. I would say there's also a pretty nice feel to the way he swoops the sword as well. But I think it's not that visible because the zoom in is happening at the same time. So when I talk about camera timing in a minute, I'm going to focus on some of that stuff. I'm going to finish what's first on my list first. So the next thing on my list is nice framing. So the framing on the first shot is really nice. You've got this, you've got the character very much in the 1/3 division line of screen left. And there is some negative space in front of him. The map is taking up some of that space, but also the captain is over on the other side there. So the framing makes sense. The composition is really beautiful. And then this one works really well too. You've got the captain on the 1/3 line on screen right. So the continuity of the two views works together really well. And then here you get in really close. And you get the sense of it feeling a little claustrophobic, which makes sense because the captain is, being cornered by this guy and his sword. So the claustrophobia of that camera view also makes a lot of sense. And towards the end, you even have the big guy taking up a lot more space over on this side of the screen. And you've got the captain kind of shrinking off onto the other side and becoming more cornered. So that's another thing that works really well with this camera view. So camera timing, I think it feels a little bit segmented. The camera angles are really nice. I think the timing maybe could be broken up a little bit more so that it feels less like everything's happening right on a beat. So with the timing of the dialogue, you've got a camera cut happening right as the first character's dialogue is finishing and before the second character's dialogue starts. Whereas, so it's sort of like blah, 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 switch, blah, 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 blah. So it's just creating this very segmented feel. If you were to wait until the captain started saying his next line of dialogue, even just 2 or 3 words in, and then cut the camera, then you would have this sense of it's sort of it ends up feeling natural in terms of the viewer. So the viewer, the viewer's eyes are looking through the camera, right? So when you have the viewers looking at a character saying something, it feels kind of weird to anticipate the next character saying something. So when the camera cut happens before that next character starts saying something, it feels like we're expecting it. Whereas if the second character starts to speak a few words in and then the camera cut happens, it feels a little bit more natural in terms of the viewer's perspective, where we're seeing this guy. We're not going to look at the other guy until he starts talking. So he starts talking and then our attention goes over there. So if the camera cut happens at that time, it has a very natural feel to it. And also, you think of in animation, you think of overlapping action in terms of different body parts when a character is doing a performance. So, you have different parts of the body overlapping each other in movement. But overlapping action can also include other senses. It can include what you're hearing and what you're seeing and so and what the camera's doing, that's another separate element entirely. So for sensorily that's a word, speaking sensorily, if I'm looking at this guy and he's talking, I'm just gonna be like, oh, and I'm probably not going to look away from him unless something else catches my attention over there. So if you have a movement coming on the screen somewhere over here, then it makes sense to look over there. If you hear something from over there, it makes sense to look over there. So so you're overlapping not just movement within the character, but you're also overlapping the camera with the audio, and thinking about the camera in terms of the viewer's perspective. And if you kind of think about the camera as being someone who's just watching the thing and they've never seen it before, right? It makes sense for the camera to follow what's happening with the action. So when some new action happens or some new audio happens, then the attention shifts. So the camera actually becomes a bit of a character in a sense. So you're thinking of the perspective of the audience as a character in a sense, and thinking of the way that they're perceiving what's happening in the scene. So those in the overlapping the movement and the audio and the camera just creates a rhythm so that you're not having things sort of hitting at the same time and creating segmented beats. And then for the last camera movement, the big zoom in, there's a similar issue there where the zoom in is happening at the same time as the sword coming in and the character coming closer, and so it ends up there's some of the action that gets lost in that. And I get the sense that you have a really nice arc with that sword, and it's very exciting, the way that the big guy is getting in close to the other guy. So if you were to have the big guy maybe before the camera moves, you have the big guy reach over, grab his arm, pull him back, and the two of them come in together. And then you see the sword do its, its swoop in, and get right under the captain's nose. And then the camera moves in on it. Then the audience is going to see all that awesome action. And you can get some really great sort of smear frame, because it's quick stuff. You can get some great smear frame shapes in there. You can create some amazing S curves in some of the lines of action with the way he's, and he reaches over and grabs the guy's arm and pulls him back, and there can be some snap in it. You know what I mean? So it's like all of that stuff can have this really awesome overlapping rhythm, that it becomes this, layers of stuff, instead of all just being one. It's like it crashes all together at the same time. And so there's a lot of stuff that ends up being unable to view, by the audience. So some subtle overlap with all of that stuff would really increase, it would increase the appeal, and it would also give you a chance to do some really fun movement in there. The breakdowns would be so much fun to do in that whole section. And would also create the, it would also sort of upgrade the amount of energy going into this whole, confrontation. And I like the stillness of everything while the captain is in his, his irises and pupils get really small and his eyes bulge out. And the little eye dart that he does there is great. Now, so there's the other eye dart, right? I was talking about the eye dart on the first guy. The eye dart on the captain is also great in this moment, because everything else is very still, and you see him, he's looking the other guy in the eye, and then down at the sword is like, you get that really clear expression of his thought process through that. And it's very simple, but it's very effective. One thing that I have an issue with is when he turns around to say, hold the court jester, it's like the movement almost is showing that it almost feels like his nose is going to get cut on that blade. I want him to like back away from it like this rather than going like this, if that makes sense. Because I feel like he's going to get cut right here because he's like, the blade is right there. It's like, if it was me, I'd be going, hold the court jester. I would be very careful about how I backed away from that blade. And then when the big guy lowers the blade, the captain lowers his head, so his neck is now sitting right on it. You know what I mean? So that's the second time I feel extremely uncomfortable about that. The choice of movement on the part of the captain. I can't imagine, brushing my nose along the blade and then coming back and putting my throat right on it. I like the expressions on the characters, but there's just that sense of it's almost like he's sacrificing himself. So I almost feel like maybe the big guy should lower the blade off screen completely, just before the captain brings his head down. I love that he comes in closer, though. I love that he really crowds him in on that side of the screen. One thing that there is an issue with the captain is his arms. They're up here. They're going through his hat. So why are they up there? And look at the shoulders here. There's a very awkward feel to the shoulders. I think that when the big guy, if the big guy, like I suggested before, if he was to grab the captain's arm and pull him, I think that would be great for the action. But also, at this stage now, his shoulder might be down and his arm is kind of off to the side here. And the other shoulder maybe is, up really high next to his ear, and maybe his arm is up like this or something to kind of have that tension, but not up above his head and into his hat. So there's this really obvious intersection in the geometry. And then maybe at the end, maybe he's able to gingerly pull his arm back from the big guy. Maybe if the sword is completely out of the scene, and he's sort of wincing, and maybe he's like, pulling his hand back during that, something like that. You could get, if the sword was out of here completely and you just had like this decent size negative space right here, you could get a nice arm and hand gesture in there. That would, that as they're going through that, he could be like slowly pulling his hand back away from, like, oh, okay. And there's a really good opportunity for something like that there. Also, in this last shot, this whole thing at the end is very pose to pose. So everything is moving very much at the same time. You do have the sword is coming down a little bit earlier, but there's so much of a sense of everything kind of coming into place at the same time. So I think if you just added if there was a little bit more of an overlap between different things, and it's really difficult to think about that sometimes when there's not a whole lot of action happening in the scene. Like, for instance, I once animated a shot with 9 baseball players. This is for a movie called Everyone's Hero. And these players were standing in place, getting their photos taken by the press. So, and in the scene, it was sort of a press reel, like an old 1930s film of a reel that they would show like on the news before a movie in a theater. And they were all getting their pictures taken. So the animation was sort of like, what are they doing? They're just standing there getting their pictures taken. But they couldn't just be still. They had to be sort of doing stuff. So between the 9 characters, I had to get them, like, one shuffling his foot, one fixing his cap, shifting the weight a little bit, stuff like that. Honestly, I wouldn't say that it would ever be recognized as an amazing scene of animation, but I was always really proud of it because everything was so subtle, and there had to be a rhythm between all 9 of those guys just kind of doing nothing. So that's what I'm talking about here is, they're not doing much, but you can get more of a sense of what's happening in what order and where do you want the audience's eye to be drawn to in the shot at what point. So perhaps first the sword comes down, and then maybe he drops down and pulls his arm back, and then big guy leans in closer. So, maybe that makes Captain move over even more screen right and almost get backed out of that side of the screen, that kind of thing. Like, make it really claustrophobic. Push the energy of that. And as he's leaning forward, could you increase the intensity of his facial expression? I'm very curious about the tattoo. I have a feeling that there is a personal story for you there with that. And it's funny how many animators put, when they can, little personal Easter eggs into some of their shots of animation. Let's see. I think, the captain's hat. The captain's hat, it's glued very much onto that head. And he's a little bit on the goofier side. I get that sense. So how great would it be if, when he is doing some of these bigger weight shifts, if the hat has a little movement on there, like it slips a little bit, and then when he does the big turnaround, maybe he turns around so fast that the hat actually rotates back this way a little bit. And so then you're not looking at the profile of the hat, which, that's a very boring shape. The shape of the hat is much more interesting from the front. So, his hat is like this, and he turns around so quickly. Maybe, it doesn't have to stay completely facing front, right? But you could have it crooked so that the view of it from, when he's yelling to the side for the court jester is a little goofy, which would make sense. He's yelling maybe he's the court, like, in a sense, he's the court jester. He's really the goofy one, but he's yelling for the court jester. And so maybe something a little goofy fits in there. And then when he gets yanked back by the big guy and the sword comes in, maybe the hat ends up really askew and crooked on his head instead of staying straight, So you get a more disheveled, disrupted feeling, where things are off kilter, which makes sense for what's happening emotionally in the scene. And then I think the last thing I'm going to focus on is the hand details. So when the character is moving from like here to here, I'm not sure how much control there is on this map rig, but can you get a little bit more overlap in the top edge or the corners when he's moving it from point A to point B? Can you bring the hands in a little bit closer and have the top of the map bow a little bit? Well, either that way or the other way, I guess, would maybe make more sense. Something like that, so that it doesn't feel like it's too rigid. And then the hands, if you get the hands, they're on the map, he's pulling it closer, but he's also asking this question. And he's increasingly tense about it. So when he pulls the map closer, giving his hands a more tense feel in those poses would be a great way to add tension to what he's saying. And then maybe by this pose, the hands are pushed in more together and the map is a little more sort of accordioned. Something like that. Of course, as I said, the capability of the map rig is something else entirely. So this is just like a creative suggestion, and whatever is available on the map for rig-wise is a completely different matter. There's some very nice overlap in this guy's hand. Very, very nice. And as I said, all the arc movements and everything are great. And when the big guy brings the sword in, you could also start with the hand sort of more open, a little more open on the sword handle, and then really tighten it up with really try to make those fingers look super tense. That hand is front and center in the shot. And so if you had the hand positioned on the sword in a way that made it very visible from our point of view and could really show off the tension of the grip, that would add a lot to the scene because it's right up front. And hands are so expressive. The lip sync all looks quite good. There's a couple of places where I think maybe you could exaggerate maybe shapes a bit more, but in general, it really does show the creation of the sound quite nicely. And it goes really well with the style of the rest of the animation with the body work. So I think, that is all looking quite nice. I think maybe the eyebrows on the captain at the end maybe could be a little bit more asymmetrical. I think they stand out a little bit as being sort of too, paired off, especially since he's so big on screen.
Just hold the jester.
Is this some kind of a joke, Captain?
If it is jokes you desire, I could summon the court jester. Summon the court jester. Hold the jester.
And I think in general, I think, there's a certain feel that your animation has, that the timing of the pose changes and stuff lends itself to. But I think I would still have the main poses, especially with Captain, hitting the mark slightly after the dialogue instead of being so right on the dialogue. And this goes along with what I said before about the camera moves, the character moves, and the audio also being part of what's overlapping. So in this case, it's the audio and the gestures, so that the gestures aren't hitting right on the audio, but slightly after. Gestures tend to be something that happens as a result of what we're thinking and saying. They're a little bit more subconscious. So it just like, it makes for a nicer flow to the overall scene as well. I mean, sometimes people are going to be making a point, a character is going to be making a point, and it's going to be like, yes, this is the way it is, you know, and that's because that's the way that they're expressing their thoughts. It's the gestures are extremely conscious with what they're saying. In this case, the character's like, a court jester, you know, so it's not in a situation where he's sort of really making a point. Where it makes more sense for him to be a little more bang on is when he turns around to call a court jester, because that is extremely deliberate. So that makes sense. But the other gestures, if they follow the dialogue slightly, I think that would work a little bit better with the more casual nature of what he's saying. All right, so I think that is it for me. This is really fun. I think that you have a really great eye for, you know, appeal, movement style, and posing style for different characters. And you definitely have a flavor that seems to be sort of a you flavor for the way that the characters are moving. And that's something that you should keep exploring. You know, I think that there's too much pressure a lot of the times to do things in a certain way. And, you know, you can have your own flavor for your art, you know, whether you're a painter, or an illustrator or an animator, you know, so keep on keeping on with that. I think that's really great. So feel free to contact me if you have questions about anything. And I hope that you enter more work into the 11 Second Club. You did a great job. Congratulations again.